I knew something was off the moment I saw the tire marks across my pasture. I'd just gotten back from hauling feed into town, and there it was, an ugly, brand-new wooden fence slicing right through the middle of my ranch like some kind of scar. I'm Owen Fairley. Been running this land for almost 15 years now. My grandfather passed it down to me, and I've kept it clean, working, and mine. So when I saw that fence posted up like it belonged, I damn near lost it. I followed it from the south gate all the way to the creek line, and that's when I saw it. Nailed right onto a post, property of Willow Bend Homeowners Association. In tiny print below, per zoning ordinance 17B. I live on the edge of Willow Bend, but I'm not part of the HOA, never signed anything, never agreed to their rules. Hell, I grow hay and keep cattle. Most of the people in Willow Bend couldn't tell a cow patty from a pancake. I marched straight down to the HOA office, which, of course, was inside some fancy model home with fake granite counters and one of those fake fruit bowls on the table. And sitting behind the desk, wearing a blazer like she was heading into a courtroom, was her Karen Zellman. President of the HOA, short blonde bob, pursed lips, and the kind of attitude that made you want to check your blood pressure. Well, if it isn't Mr. Fairley, she said without even looking up from her laptop. Finally decided to make yourself part of the neighborhood? You built a fence on my property. Correction, she tapped a folder on the desk. We extended the community boundary to include the undeveloped section bordering our private lots. According to our recent zoning petition, I never signed off on that. You didn't have to. County planning approved it. We were well within our rights. I leaned over the desk. You never sent me notice. You never asked permission. You trespassed and built on my land. Karen smiled, that tight-lipped, fake courtesy smile. Then I suggest you hire a lawyer. I didn't need a lawyer to know what was mine. So that night, I fired up my tractor, hooked up the tow chain, and ripped every damn board of that fence out of the ground. Every post, every sign, hauled it all to the edge of her cul-de-sac and dumped it on her manicured lawn like a stack of firewood. 2 days later, I got served. Karen filed a civil suit against me for destruction of HOA property. Claimed I owed them $27,000 in damages. Said I had jeopardized community safety and violated newly adopted architectural integrity standards. But what she didn't know was, I already had a plan, and it started with a dusty old file in the county records office. I parked my truck outside the Travis County Records building just after 7 in the morning. The place was quiet, still smelling like industrial cleaner and old paper. I wasn't there to browse. I had a very specific purpose. My grandfather was meticulous. Every land survey, deed, easement, and plat map he ever signed off on was filed, notarized, and bound in manila folders with dates marked in red ink. I asked the clerk for parcel 9C217, the land I stood on, worked, and slept on, still listed under Fairley Agricultural Holdings. She raised an eyebrow when she saw the zoning request tied to Willow Bend's HOA application. Looks like someone tried to sneak a boundary adjustment under conditional rezoning, she muttered, flipping pages. But this is flagged. It was never finalized. Flagged by who? She pulled up a digital scan. County Planning Commission rejected their final submission. They were missing environmental impact reports and didn't have your consent on file. I leaned in. So their petition failed. Technically, yes. They filed an appeal, but it was dismissed 6 weeks ago. No notification of reversal. This land's still zoned agricultural, and it's not under any HOA jurisdiction. That was the crack I needed. I took photos of every page. I also paid for certified copies just in case and left with a folder thick enough to make an HOA lawyer sweat. But I wasn't done. I drove straight to the county appraiser's office next. I needed to know if anything else had changed without my knowledge. The man behind the desk wore a bolo tie and had a nameplate that read D. Rutledge. He scanned my parcel info and frowned. Odd, he said, tapping the screen. Your taxes were reassessed 2 months ago, filed under a residential multi-use overlay. That shouldn't have happened without a hearing. It didn't. I never got a notice. He nodded slowly, then clicked over to the submission file. Here it is: application submitted by Willow Bend Development Group, signed by someone named Vernon Zellman. I froze. Any relation to Karen Zellman? He didn't look up. Same mailing address. So now it wasn't just a fence. They'd forged reclassification papers to spike my property taxes and probably push me into compliance through sheer financial pressure. Who approved it? He scanned the digital signature. Looks like someone in our office stamped it, but it's under investigation. You're not the only landowner this happened to. That's when I realized this wasn't just about me. This was a coordinated land grab. I thanked Rutledge and walked out, heart pounding. I called a friend of mine, Lisbeth Cantu, an old Army buddy turned municipal attorney. She answered on the second ring. Tell me you're not calling about zoning law. I need you to look up a Vernon Zellman. He's got ties to Willow Bend HOA and just filed bogus rezoning on my ranch. There was a pause. That name's come up before. He's on the board of at least 3 shell development corporations tied to HOA expansions. You're not the first complaint. Can you get me anything solid? I'll send you what I've got. But if they forge documents, we're in criminal territory. File a report, now. I hung up and drove straight to the sheriff's department. Deputy Haverson took my statement. I handed over the certified files, copies of the forged applications, and photos from the appraiser's office. He didn't waste time. This is bad, he muttered, leafing through the papers. There's a pattern here. We've had similar reports from 2 other property owners also bordering HOA land. You think it's coordinated? I think it's organized fraud. And if you're right about the forged classification, someone's going to prison. He took everything into evidence and promised me investigators would be looped in. I was halfway back to my truck when my phone buzzed. It was Lisbeth. Check your email. I found something. I pulled over in a gas station lot and opened the file. It was a scanned memo from the Willow Bend HOA's last closed-door meeting. Someone had leaked it. It read, Phase 2 boundary integration must be executed before Q3. Target parcels, 9C217, 9C215, 9C226. Reclassification will be applied retroactively, resistance expected. Legal contingency fund approved, Vernon to handle county filings. They had names, parcel numbers, a fund to cover legal retaliation. That was enough for the district attorney. By the end of the week, subpoenas were issued. Vernon Zellman was brought in for questioning. Karen. She tried to play innocent, but the paper trail was too clean and the memo too precise. Meanwhile, I showed up to court with Lisbeth and a manila folder stacked with county rejections, zoning maps, and digital correspondence. Karen's lawyer didn't even make it past the opening statement before the judge raised an eyebrow and asked, "You sure you want to proceed with this?" They dropped the suit within the hour. The judge turned to me before closing and said, "Mr. Fairley, if I were you, I'd press charges. You've got a textbook case for property fraud and attempted annexation under false pretenses." I didn't need to think twice. By the following month, both Zellmans were indicted on multiple counts: fraud, forgery, abuse of zoning authority. The county launched a full audit of HOA filings going back 5 years. And the best part, the fence, still lying in a pile right at the edge of their pristine cul-de-sac, now taped off as evidence. Turns out, when you grow up learning how to mend fences, you also learn how to tear them down, especially the kind built on lies. 3 weeks after the court dismissed the HOA's bogus lawsuit and the Zellmans were indicted, I figured things would finally settle. But when I opened my mailbox and found a notice from the IRS, I knew this wasn't over. The letter claimed I owed nearly $78,000 in back taxes due to undeclared capital gains from a property transfer. Only, I hadn't sold or transferred an inch of my land. The notice even included a supposed closing date, February 3rd, listing a sale to a shell company called Elmview Asset Holdings. I sat on my porch staring at the letter, my fingers tightening around the edge of the paper until it crinkled. This wasn't just a grudge. Someone was working angles behind the scenes using federal systems to try and destroy me financially. I drove straight to the Taxpayer Advocate Service downtown. A woman named Regina Brooks took my case. She was sharp, no nonsense, and didn't bother with small talk. "Show me everything," she said, snapping on her reading glasses. I handed over the IRS letter, the parcel number, and the memo Lisbeth had dug up weeks earlier. Her eyes narrowed. This transfer was never recorded through a legitimate title agency. The document here is a Form 8949, but she pulled up a system screen. There's no corroborating deed. That means someone submitted paperwork to the IRS without a legal basis. Fraudulent filings at the federal level. Can someone just do that and get away with it? She glanced up. Not if I have anything to say about it. Within an hour, she'd flagged the filing and escalated it to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. But that was only part of the mess. The forged sale triggered a reassessment of my land's value, and if it hadn't been caught in time, I'd have been on the hook for taxes on a sale that never happened. Regina printed a copy of the fake filing. There was a forged signature at the bottom mine, only it wasn't mine. The loops were too wide, the spacing wrong. The notary listed didn't exist in the state registry. It was all fabricated. I called Lisbeth again. She met me outside the county courthouse that afternoon with 2 manila folders and a look that told me things had escalated even further. "They didn't just file fake taxes," she said, handing me the folders. "They filed a quitclaim deed in another county, trying to reroute ownership through a defunct land trust. One that was dissolved 5 years ago after being caught laundering properties through shell companies." My throat tightened. Why would they go that far? She didn't hesitate. Because they're desperate. The Zellmans weren't just HOA heads. They were part of a wider scheme flipping rezoned land to developers using fake ownership records. They needed your land to complete a corridor for a planned commercial strip. You were the last holdout. Without you, they can't connect the parcels. I opened the folder. Inside were satellite images, zoning projections, and emails between Vernon and a man listed as J. Arlen, an executive at a construction firm based in Houston. They mentioned projected revenue, development incentives, and a timeline that included bulldozing my ranch within the year. We brought everything to the district attorney. This time, the charges expanded: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, falsification of government records, identity theft, and attempted unlawful seizure of private property. The DA assigned a task force to trace every filing the Zellmans had made in the last 2 years, but the HOA board wasn't going quietly. The next week, they held an emergency meeting closed to non-members, of course. I waited across the street in my truck, watching folks shuffle into the community center, some looking confused, others tight-lipped like they already knew the playbook. That night, my barn caught fire. I smelled the smoke before I saw the glow. By the time I got out there, flames had already chewed through the side wall. I grabbed the hose and called the fire department with the other hand. It took over an hour to put it out. 2 of my tractors were gone. Hay bales gone. The west wall collapsed before sunrise. The fire marshal found traces of an accelerant diesel mixed with something else. Arson was confirmed within 48 hours. Deputy Haverson came out again, this time with a warrant. A neighbor's outdoor camera had caught a dark SUV idling near my fence line around midnight. Plates were partially visible. They traced it to a rental car paid for with a card belonging to a man named Curtis Dilly, treasurer of the HOA. Curtis was arrested the next day. When interrogated, he cracked fast. He thought he was just sending a message, didn't know the barn would catch that fast. Claimed Vernon told him it would just scare the guy into cutting a deal. That confession opened the floodgates. The FBI got involved. Turns out, the Zellmans were under investigation for a land fraud scheme stretching across 3 counties. They'd been bribing low-level clerks, forging notary stamps, and laundering properties through dummy corporations for years. Some of the shell companies were tied to state contracts, and there was talk of federal racketeering charges. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding. The local feed store ran a fundraiser to help me replace the burned equipment. Folks from all around the county came out, people I didn't even know. One guy, a retired lineman from 2 towns over, handed me a rebuilt carburetor and said, "Nobody burns down a neighbor's barn in this state and walks away." The community rallied. But more than that, they got angry. Several HOA members resigned publicly, citing threats and coercion. One woman, a retired teacher named Alina, testified that the board had pressured her into signing approval forms she never read. She'd been promised tax savings and neighborhood improvements. Instead, her name was on a fraudulent rezoning petition. It all came to a head when the state attorney general announced charges against 9 individuals tied to Willow Bend's HOA and its affiliated shell entities. The Zellmans were at the center. Their assets were frozen. Their home was seized as evidence, and the HOA dissolved by court order. The land they tried to steal from me, restored on record with every forged filing legally reversed. But the best part came a month later when Regina called me from the IRS office with a tone I hadn't heard before, almost amused. "You're getting a check," she said. "A check, a refund." Turns out, the IRS froze a return $42,000 from one of the shell companies Vernon used. They traced it back to your parcel's fraudulent sale. Since it was linked to your stolen identity, and you're the victim, restitution laws say you're entitled to the funds. I laughed for the first time in weeks. So they tried to bankrupt me, and now they're paying to rebuild my barn. Poetic, isn't it? It didn't undo the damage. Didn't erase the months of stress, the legal wrangling, or the scorched timber that still smelled like smoke every time I walked past it. But justice? Oh, that came in full, and that pile of fence boards, still sitting in a heap outside what used to be the HOA's welcome sign. Only now, there's a new sign posted by the county, private land. No trespassing, agricultural zoning, protected by law. No more fake petitions. No more secret meetings, just land, honest and undivided, just like my grandfather left it. The first frost hit early that year, crisping the edges of the pasture grass and glazing the top rail of my rebuilt fence with ice. I was feeding the goats when my phone buzzed in my chest pocket. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. "This is Special Agent Darren Cole with the FBI's Public Corruption Division," the voice said. "I'm following up on the Willow Bend HOA investigation. We've got deeper layers, and your name came up in connection with a sealed warrant we just executed." I set down the feed bucket. "What kind of layers?" "There's a federal audit of a redevelopment grant from 2 years ago. Money was supposed to fund stormwater infrastructure and green space upgrades, but most of it vanished. We traced disbursements to 3 LLCs. Your parcel was listed as a pilot site in the grant proposal." My gut clenched. "I never signed anything, never received funds, never agreed to be part of any grant." "That's why I'm calling," he said. "We need your statement." "There's a chance you're entitled to restitution from the grant fraud, but more importantly, your property was used to validate a federal funding application, under false pretenses." I agreed to meet him at the district field office. When I arrived, Agent Cole met me in the lobby, a tall man with a buzzed head and the kind of posture that said he took his job seriously. He walked me to a private room where another agent already had a file open on the table. "Take a seat, Mr. Fairley," the second agent said. "We've got some things to show you." The first document was a Department of Housing and Urban Development grant application. It listed my ranch as Public Parcel A, designated for transitional development and stormwater mitigation. The listed contact, Vernon Zellman. The digital signature was a scan of a signature that barely resembled mine, but enough to fool someone behind a desk. Agent Cole pointed to a line item. $84,000 was allocated for a BIOS wall installation on your property. According to the report, it was completed last year. I shook my head. Nothing's ever been built there. No equipment came through. That pasture's been grazing land since my grandfather's time. The second agent flipped a page. They submitted photos, fabricated ones. We believe of a landscaped runoff area with artificial berms and native plantings. They used recycled stock images, Cole added. Same photo shows up in a proposal 2 towns over under a different name. We think this was part of a larger laundering scheme. The shell companies received the funds, kicked a portion back to the HOA infrastructure fund, and then funneled the rest into private accounts tied to the Zellmans and their associates. I leaned back, trying to absorb it all. So they didn't just try to take my land, they used it to steal federal money. Agent Cole nodded. That's why we're pushing for a RICO case. Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. This wasn't a simple local scam. It was organized fraud across multiple jurisdictions. I gave my statement, signed the disclosure forms, and left feeling like I'd just stepped out of a political thriller. But things weren't over yet. 2 days later, a marshal from the U.S. District Court arrived at my ranch with a folder. Inside were documents authorizing me as a key witness in the federal case. My testimony would be used to tie the fraudulent filings to the grant disbursements, and more critically, to prove the HOA operated as a criminal enterprise under the guise of a nonprofit. The trial began 6 weeks later in Austin. The courtroom was packed reporters, federal agents, even a few of my neighbors who'd lost land to similar schemes. Karen Zellman sat at the defense table, her hair darker now, face thinner. Vernon was next to her, handcuffed, looking like someone who'd bet the farm and lost. The prosecution opened with a slideshow of forged documents, bank transfers, and grant applications. Then came the testimonies. A junior accountant from one of the development firms admitted to altering invoices under Vernon's direction. A former HOA board member said he'd been threatened with legal action if he didn't sign blank zoning forms. The county clerk revealed that her signature had been scanned and used without consent on at least 9 records. When it was my turn, I took the stand and told the truth. About the fence, the fake tax filing, the forged land transfer, the barn fire, the false grant application. Each detail etched into the record. The defense tried to discredit me, suggesting I had a vendetta, but the paper trail was too clean. The jury saw through it. By the 3rd week, it was clear the defense had no ground left. The judge denied a mistrial motion. The verdict came down on a Friday, guilty on all counts: mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, attempted arson, use of a nonprofit for criminal activity. Both Zellmans were sentenced to federal prison. Vernon got 24 years, Karen 18. But the fallout didn't stop with them. The county launched a full review of every HOA operating within its borders. At least 4 were shut down completely. A task force was created to monitor nonprofit zoning applications. And a new ordinance was passed requiring any HOA boundary expansion to receive unanimous consent from adjoining landowners, with public hearings and independent audits. One afternoon, I got a call from the county commissioner. "We're drafting a resolution in your name, the Fairly provision. Guarantees landowners can't be annexed into HOA jurisdiction without explicit notarized consent. No more loopholes, no more silent takeovers." I didn't say much, just nodded and thanked him. The barn was rebuilt by then. Bigger, stronger, painted red like the original. The community had come through, supplies donated, labor volunteered, even a new hay conveyor installed by a retired machinist who'd read the story in the paper. One morning, I walked the fence line with my dog, Jasper. Frost still clung to the grass, but the sun had started rising earlier. The pasture looked peaceful, honest. I passed the old spot where the illegal fence had once stood, nothing left now but clean posts and open space. A truck pulled up near the gate. It was Alina, the retired teacher who'd testified during the trial. She stepped out and handed me an envelope. "It's from the neighborhood," she said. Not just Willow Bend, folks from all over the county, we took up a collection for legal fees, for your time, for everything you stood up for. I opened it. Inside was a check for over $30,000 and a letter signed by nearly 200 people. I looked at her. You didn't have to do this, we know. That's why we did. That night I sat on the porch, boots up on the railing, watching the stars come out over my land. Not the HOAs, not some shell companies. Mine, and it would stay that way. Justice had taken its time, but it had come. Not just through the courts, but through neighbors standing up, systems being changed, and lies finally being dragged into the light. The Zellmans tried to bury me in paper and power plays. All they did was build the case that tore them down and me. I just kept doing what I always had, raising livestock, fixing fences, and holding the line.